She walked through the streets of the city every morning, just like anyone else. She wore a plain coat, her hair pulled back simply, and carried a small bag with her lunch and a notebook. Most people didn't notice her. Some barely gave her a second glance. She wasn't loud, she didn't seek attention, and she never demanded it. To the outside world, she was ordinary. Nothing about her stood out. She went to work, did her job carefully, and returned home. That was her life, day after day. She had grown used to being overlooked. At the small cafe she often visited on her way to work, the barista always gave her the same polite smile, but nothing more. She always ordered the same tea sitting in the corner near the window, watching people come and go. Businessmen and women passed by, talking quickly on their phones. Students walked in with laughter and music from their headphones. Children tugged at their parents' hands, excited about the world outside. She sipped her tea quietly, sometimes sketching small lines in her notebook. Always careful not to disturb anyone. Some days, she liked to observe people for a long time. She liked to notice small details that others missed. The way a man tied his shoes, the way a young woman brushed her hair with a nervous hand, the way the old couple held hands while sitting on a bench outside the cafe. She noticed patterns and movements in people, things that made her feel connected to the world even when she felt invisible herself. She had learned long ago that you could understand a lot about someone just by watching them quietly. Her apartment was small, but cozy. She had decorated it simply with a few plants, a lamp, and books stacked carefully on a shelf. In one corner, almost hidden, there was an old piano. The piano was heavy and dark, with scratches on its surface, but it had a presence in the room. She had inherited it from her family years ago. Most days, it was silent, like her life, waiting for something to awaken it. Music had always been a secret part of her life. She loved it deeply, more than anything else, but she never shared it with anyone. She had spent hours practicing in that corner of her small apartment, her fingers dancing across the keys, while the world outside went on without noticing. The notes told stories she could never say out loud. Some nights, she played until her fingers hurt, until her heart ached with the emotion she could not speak. Her music carried her pain, her joy, her memories, and her dreams. But the world didn't know about this hidden life. It had no idea that, behind the ordinary woman, a hidden passion thrived. At work, she moved through her tasks efficiently. Her colleagues liked her because she was quiet, reliable, and polite. She never complained, never argued, and never tried to draw attention. They thought of her as dependable, but unremarkable. Sometimes she overheard them laughing about someone else's achievements, someone who was loud and flashy. They admired talent when it was obvious, but she was careful to remain unseen. She knew her talent was something sacred, not something for casual praise or shallow admiration. It was hers, and she liked it that way. Still, there were moments when she felt the ache of invisibility. Walking home on the crowded streets, she sometimes wondered if anyone would ever really see her. Would anyone ever hear the music she carried inside her? The music that could make people stop and feel something they hadn't felt before? She tried not to dwell on it. She told herself that it didn't matter if no one noticed her. Music was her companion, her voice, her friend. That was enough. But a small part of her wondered. The city around her moved fast. People were always in a hurry, stepping over cracks in the pavement, checking the time on their watches, rushing toward the next thing. She moved slower, taking the time to notice small things like the way sunlight reflected off a window, or the sound of leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. Life passed her by quietly, and she accepted it. She had learned to live in the background, to move with patience, to exist without making waves. Her coworkers sometimes invited her to gatherings after work. She usually declined, claiming she had other plans. The truth was, she preferred the silence of her apartment, the quiet company of her piano, and the freedom to let her thoughts and feelings pour out in music. She had few friends, but the friends she had were people who understood her without needing words. They accepted her for who she was, even if they didn't fully know the depth of her hidden world. One rainy evening, she walked home with her coat pulled tight and her umbrella tilted against the wind. The streets were slick with rain, reflecting the lights of passing cars. She moved slowly, enjoying the rhythm of her steps in puddles, the way the city felt different under the rain. When she reached her apartment, she set her bag down and looked at the piano. The rain had cleared her mind, left her feeling both restless and calm. She opened the lid and let her fingers touch the keys. The notes began softly, like whispers, gentle and careful. As she played, she felt herself becoming invisible and visible at the same time. Invisible to the world outside her apartment, but fully alive in the music she created. The notes were her words, and for the first time that evening, she spoke without fear. Each chord carried the memory of her childhood, her struggles, her small victories, and her quiet dreams. She lost herself in the sound, letting it flow through her, cleansing her, making her feel like she belonged somewhere beyond the ordinary. Sometimes when she played, she imagined people listening. She imagined strangers stopping on the streets, turning their heads, their eyes widening as they heard the beauty of the music. She imagined them feeling emotions they had long forgotten: joy, sorrow, hope, and wonder. But most nights, the imagined audience remained just that, imagined. She played for herself, and that was enough. She had made peace with the quiet, with the ordinary appearance she carried in public, and with the invisible life she led in private. Yet something deep inside her stirred. A small, persistent thought, like a soft note at the edge of a melody, suggested that one day someone might hear. Someone might stop and really listen. She didn't know when it would happen or where, but the idea lingered, warming her heart and giving her fingers strength. For now, she let the music fill the room, fill her mind, and fill her soul. She allowed herself to exist fully in that private world, knowing that her extraordinary self was waiting quietly for the right moment to appear. The ordinary life she led had taught her patience. She had learned that not every moment was meant for recognition, that not every talent needed applause, and that beauty could exist quietly, unseen, until it found the right ears. And while the world around her remained unaware of the depth within her, she knew it was there. The music, the hours of practice, the careful observations of life, they were all part of her story. A story that was slowly building toward a moment she had not yet seen, but deeply felt in her heart. And so, she continued. Each day she walked the familiar streets, interacted politely with colleagues, observed strangers, and returned to her piano. She carried herself simply, quietly, as though she were just another face in the crowd. But the piano, tucked in the corner of her apartment, held a secret that no one else knew. It waited, like a patient friend, for the day her ordinary world would collide with something extraordinary. That day, she believed silently, would come. Until then, she played, she observed, and she lived quietly, carrying her invisible brilliance in every note, every gesture, and every breath. The ordinary exterior hid something far beyond ordinary. It hid the passion, the discipline, and the endless hours of unseen effort. It hid the heart of someone who could touch souls without words. And though the world around her continued without noticing, she knew something essential. Extraordinary things often start quietly, hidden in plain sight in the life of someone who seems ordinary, until a single moment changes everything. And so she waited, not impatiently, but with quiet hope. She continued her routine, walked her familiar streets, sipped her tea in the corner cafe, and watched people pass by. She smiled politely when people glanced at her, nodding in acknowledgement, never revealing the secret inside her. The piano remained in the corner, silent for the moment, but ready, always ready. And in that small, ordinary apartment, she nurtured her talent like a flame, small yet unyielding, waiting for the day it would light up the world beyond her walls. Every day she lived between two worlds, one ordinary, unnoticed and familiar, and one extraordinary, alive, and pulsing in every note she played. And as the city carried on, oblivious, she carried her music with her. Unseen, yet real, ordinary, yet remarkable. Waiting for the day when the world would finally hear, the next morning felt different, though she didn't know why. The sun rose over the city, casting soft light on wet streets from the night's rain. She walked the familiar path to her work, her coat pulled tight, her bag resting lightly on her shoulder. People passed her quickly, busy with their own lives, and she moved among them quietly as always. But today, there was a slight unease in her chest, a little flutter that she couldn't ignore. It was the kind of feeling that told her something unusual was about to happen. Even though she couldn't see it yet, at work, everything appeared the same. Her colleagues were busy with papers, phone calls, and meetings. The hum of computers filled the office, and the smell of fresh coffee lingered in the break room. She went about her tasks, like she always did, sorting files, carefully answering emails politely and making small notes in her notebook. But today, she noticed small details she hadn't paid attention to before. A colleague seemed nervous, glancing at her and smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. A flyer had been posted on the bulletin board near the entrance, bright and colorful, announcing a small talent showcase in the lobby of the building. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the words. Talent showcase. Public performance piano. Her fingers itched slightly, just thinking about it. She had always imagined the day when someone might hear her play, but she had never expected it to be so close, so immediate. She looked around to see if anyone else was noticing the flyer. Most people walked by without paying attention, chatting casually or checking their phones. No one seemed aware of how much this small announcement could change her day. She tried to push the thought aside. Maybe it wasn't meant for her. Maybe it was just another event she wouldn't participate in. But the image of sitting in the lobby, playing for people she didn't know, kept returning to her mind. She thought about the piano waiting at home, its keys smooth and familiar under her fingertips. She thought about the quiet hours she had spent practicing, learning, making mistakes, and discovering what music could do. She felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. All morning, she couldn't focus on her work. Her mind kept drifting back to the flyer. By midday, she had made up her mind, though she didn't tell anyone. She would go. Not to perform at first, but just to see. She wanted to observe the space, feel the sounds of the room, and understand what it would mean to play in front of people. Even that small step made her pulse quicken. When lunch came, she walked to the lobby, her steps slow and careful. The space was large, open, and surprisingly quiet. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, reflecting off the polished floors. Chairs and tables were arranged neatly, and a small stage had been set up at one end with a piano placed in the center. A few people were already there, setting up microphones, adjusting chairs, and moving instruments. She watched them from the back, hidden in the shadows. Noticing the way their hands moved with purpose and precision, her eyes fell on the piano. It looked ordinary to anyone else, just another instrument waiting for someone to play it. But to her, it was alive. She imagined her fingers touching the keys, feeling the smooth wood beneath them, listening to the sound that would flow from them. She felt a pang of longing mixed with fear. She had never performed in front of strangers. What if they didn't like what she played? What if they laughed, or worse, ignored her as they had always ignored everything about her? A voice behind her startled her slightly. "You here for the showcase?" a man asked. He looked friendly, but curious. She nodded, unsure of what to say. "I've never performed in public before," she admitted softly. He smiled warmly. "It's okay. Most people haven't. Just go when you're ready." He gestured toward the piano. "The audience will be small, and it's friendly. You might enjoy it." She swallowed hard and nodded again. She stayed in the corner, watching as others went up, one by one, to play their pieces. Some sang, some played guitars, a few tried the piano. Their music was good, but nothing extraordinary. It reminded her of her own training, her hours of practice, the precision and feeling she had learned to bring to every note. Watching them, she realized how nervous she had been. These performers were brave, stepping up where she had never dared. When the first round ended, she moved closer to the piano. Her heart beat rapidly, but she told herself to stay calm. She put her hands on the keys gently, just touching them as if testing the connection. The keys responded smoothly, familiar and comforting. She took a deep breath and played a soft scale, letting the sound float across the room. No one was listening yet. The room was empty, but she felt a spark, a small thrill that told her she was ready. time passed quickly. People came and went, chatting, laughing, and listening to the performances. She remained in the background, watching carefully, learning the rhythm of the room, the way sound carried, the way people responded to music. She noticed small things, the way a certain chord would make someone stop talking, the way a pause could draw attention, the way silence itself could become powerful. She absorbed it all, preparing herself for the moment she knew would come. Finally, someone approached her. "Would you like to play?" they asked gently. She hesitated, her fingers trembling. She thought of the piano at home, the countless hours she had spent alone, and the safety of her private world. Yet something inside her nudged her forward. She nodded slowly. The person smiled, gesturing to the piano. "Whenever you're ready. Don't worry, just play." She walked forward carefully, each step feeling heavier than the last. The stage seemed larger than she expected, and the lights above made her skin tingle. People began to notice her presence. A few curious faces looked toward her, whispering quietly. She felt their eyes, their judgments, their expectations. And for the first time, she felt truly seen, not for what she appeared to be, but for the potential they sensed in her. She sat at the piano and rested her fingers lightly on the keys. She closed her eyes, remembering the countless hours she had spent practicing, the music that had lived in her heart for so long. She let the memories guide her, the quiet determination, the small joys and sorrows that had shaped her. She took a deep breath and began to play, starting softly, tentatively. Testing the waters, the first notes were gentle, almost hesitant. But as she continued, her confidence grew. Her hands moved fluidly, guided by memory and emotion. The melody unfolded naturally, a story told without words, filled with longing, hope, and quiet strength. People began to notice. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The room seemed to change as the music flowed, filling every corner, reaching every ear. Her heart raced. But her fingers remained steady. She felt a strange freedom in the act of playing in public, a feeling she had never imagined. The fear that had gripped her moments ago melted into something else: joy, fulfillment, and a deep connection to everyone listening. The ordinary woman they had seen in the lobby was disappearing, replaced by someone extraordinary, alive, and radiant in her talent. By the time she finished, there was a moment of silence. People blinked, unsure if they had really heard what they just did. Then, softly, claps began, growing louder until the room was filled with applause. She felt a wave of relief and surprise. She had done it. She had stepped into the world, shared her music, and been heard. For the first time, she realized that being ordinary was only a matter of perception. Her music revealed her truth, the truth that had been there all along, waiting for the right moment. Afterward, people came up to her, expressing amazement and admiration. Some were polite, some were genuinely moved. They asked questions, complimented her technique, and told her how much the music had touched them. She answered simply, quietly, grateful but shy. Inside, however, she felt something shifting. She realized that the world she had lived in quietly for so long was not so inaccessible after all. Her talent had given her a bridge, a way to connect with others without words, without pretense. When she finally returned home that evening, her hands ached slightly, but her heart was full. She sat at her own piano in her apartment, touching the keys softly, savoring the memory of the day. She played again, this time just for herself, and every note felt lighter, freer, and more alive. The ordinary life she had known remained outside her door, but inside she carried something new, a sense of possibility, of courage, and the knowledge that she could step into the light when the time was right. The next morning, she woke with a quiet excitement. The memory of the previous day lingered in her mind, making the familiar streets feel different. The cafe, the office, the busy city street saw seemed to hum with new meaning. She knew she had changed, even if no one else had noticed yet. And deep inside, she felt the stirring of something she had long hidden, the desire to play, to share, to step forward, to let the world see her extraordinary self. The day of the bigger performance arrived faster than she expected. She had been invited to play at a small community event, a gathering meant to showcase local talent. Unlike the quiet lobby of her workplace, this event would have a crowd people she didn't know. People whose eyes would be on her as she sat at the piano. She woke early that morning, nerves and excitement mingling in her chest like a quiet storm. She went through her usual routine, making tea, walking to the window, observing the city. But the world outside looked different. The streets seemed sharper, brighter, alive in a way she hadn't noticed before. Her thoughts were filled with music. She imagined the piano waiting for her at the venue. The way her fingers would move across the keys, the sound reaching out to touch strangers. She thought about her apartment piano as a quiet companion that had nurtured her for years. The contrast between that solitude and the bustling room she was about to enter. She felt both anticipation and fear. What if she made a mistake? What if people didn't understand her music? She shook the thoughts away, reminding herself of the hours of practice, the countless nights she had spent playing alone. She had prepared for this, even if her heart raced at the thought of all those eyes watching. When she arrived at the venue, she was struck by the atmosphere. The hall was small, but elegant, with chairs arranged in neat rows. Soft lights hanging from the ceiling and a raised stage at the front. The piano sat in the center, gleaming under the lights. People were already arriving, chatting in small groups, laughing and finding seats. She felt a moment of panic, imagining every face turning toward her, every eye fixed on her hands. But she took a deep breath, reminding herself that the music was hers, that it belonged to her, and that it had the power to speak even when words could not. She wandered to the back of the hall, observing quietly. Other performers were warming up, tuning guitars, practicing vocals, and tapping piano keys nervously. She watched the way they moved, noticing their confidence, their small tremors of fear, the way they held themselves. She realized that they were all human, just like her. They had talent, yes, but so did she. And her music carried something they might not even understand. Hours of solitude. Careful attention and emotion poured into every note. The host of the event came over to her and smiled warmly. "Are you ready?" they asked. She nodded, feeling her stomach tighten. "Whenever you are," they said, and gestured toward the stage. She walked slowly, each step heavy and light at the same time. The floor beneath her felt solid, grounding her, but the weight of the moment pressed on her chest. When she reached the piano, she paused, resting her hands lightly on the keys. Feeling their familiar smoothness, she closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She remembered the quiet hours at home, the music that had lived inside her for so long. She thought about the emotions she had kept hidden, the joy and sorrow, the small victories and quiet failures. She thought about the moments she had watched people in the cafe, the streets, and in her office, noticing life in ways no one else did. All of it came together in a single thought. This was her moment to share, to be seen in the truest way she knew. The first note sounded softly, almost hesitant, filling the hall with a delicate whisper. People turned, curious, adjusting their focus. She let the music flow slowly at first, a gentle melody that unfolded like a quiet story. Her fingers moved naturally, as if they knew the path before her mind did. She felt her heart synchronize with the rhythm, the music carrying both her fear and her courage, blending them into something alive. The sound spread across the room, touching listeners in ways words could not. At first, some people seemed distracted. They whispered to one another, checked their phones, or shifted in their chairs. But the notes persisted, steady and strong, carrying emotion that could not be ignored. Gradually, heads lifted, eyes focused. The audience began to understand that this was not just music being played, it was a story. A life poured into sound, delicate yet powerful. She felt a surge of confidence, realizing that the music had its own authority. It did not depend on her nerves or hesitation. Once the notes were released, they carried their own weight. Demanding attention, she let her hands move faster, the melody growing richer and more intricate. Her fingers danced across the keys, flowing from one chord to another seamlessly. The music became her voice, her words, her language. Every emotion she had ever felt found a place in the melody, the joy of small moments, the sorrow of quiet losses, the hope that had carried her through invisible days. People in the audience shifted in their seats, drawn in by the sound. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward, listening intently, their faces softening with recognition of the feeling behind the notes as she played. She noticed the subtle ways people responded. A woman near the front wiped her eyes quietly, moved by the emotion in the music. A young man leaned back, letting the notes flow over him, lost in thought. A child whispered to a parent, pointing at the piano, fascinated by the sounds. She felt a connection to everyone in the room, a bond that needed no words. For the first time, she understood the power of sharing her music with the world. It was not about applause or recognition. It was about touching lives, making people feel something they had forgotten or never noticed. The music swelled, becoming more complex, more daring. Her fingers moved with precision, but also with abandon, letting intuition guide her. She experimented with tempo, dynamics, and rhythm, creating small surprises that kept the audience captivated. The ordinary woman they had seen minutes before was gone. In her place was someone extraordinary, alive, radiant with talent that had been hidden for too long. She felt a rush of exhilaration, a blend of joy and fear as the music reached a peak. Every note carried her heart, her soul, and her story. She could feel her own transformation. Playing in public was unlike playing alone at home. The energy of the room, the presence of listeners, and the awareness of shared experience made her more alive, more aware, more fully herself. She realized that the ordinary life she had led was only part of her identity. The music, the talent, and the courage she had kept hidden were equally real. She could step into the world and be extraordinary without losing the quiet, reflective self she had always valued as the performance reached its climax. She slowed slightly, letting the final notes linger in the air. The sound faded gently, leaving a quiet tension in the room. People blinked, unsure how to react, suspended in the moment she had created. Then, softly at first and then louder, the applause began. Hands clapped, feet tapped, and voices murmured in appreciation. She felt a warmth spread through her, a mixture of relief, pride, and happiness. She had done it. She had shared her music, her soul, and her story, and people had listened. Truly listened. Afterward, people came forward to speak with her. They asked questions, complimented her, and shared their feelings. Some were surprised by her skill, having expected something ordinary. Others were moved, admitting that they had never experienced music like hers. She answered softly, grateful but humble, knowing that the music itself had done the talking. Inside, she felt a quiet transformation. The world had acknowledged her talent, even if only for a brief moment, and that recognition changed something fundamental in her. She left the stage feeling lighter than she had in years. The nerves, the fear, and the uncertainty that had accompanied her for so long seemed to have dissolved into the air. She walked through the hall, observing people still talking about the performance, still carrying the impression of the music with them. She realized that what she had feared, the judgment, the scrutiny, the mistakes, was less important than the act of sharing itself. She had been brave, and that bravery had opened a door she had never thought possible. Back at her apartment that evening, she sat at her piano once more. She played softly, letting the memory of the performance flow through her fingers. The music was familiar, comforting, and full of the energy she had felt on stage. She reflected on the day, the audience, and the emotions that had passed between them. She understood now that her ordinary life had been only one layer of who she was. The other layer, the one that could create, inspire, and move people, was equally essential. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what the future might hold. Perhaps there would be more performances, more opportunities to share her music, more moments where people would stop and listen. She did not crave fame or attention, but she wanted the connection that music could bring. The way it could touch hearts and bridge gaps that words could not. She realized that stepping into the light did not diminish her quiet self, it enhanced it, giving it purpose and depth. That night, she fell asleep with the sound of her piano in her mind, a melody of courage, hope, and possibility. The ordinary woman who walked the streets and sat quietly in cafes still existed, But now she carried a new truth. She was extraordinary in ways the world had not yet fully seen. And she knew that the journey was only beginning. The next event was bigger than she expected. Word of her performance at the community hall had spread quietly, like a small ripple turning into a wave. People who had not known her before were curious. Some colleagues mentioned it in passing, smiling at her shyly as if they had just realized something important about her. She felt the attention keenly, not used to it. But she also felt a small surge of pride that she had not allowed herself before. She was no longer invisible. Not entirely. The hall that day was filled to capacity. Chairs lined the room, people standing along the walls, leaning in to see her face and the piano she would play. She entered quietly, feeling the weight of anticipation settle over her. The lights were brighter, the space larger, and the audience much bigger than she had imagined. Her stomach fluttered, a nervous dance she had learned to accept. But she reminded herself of the sound she carried within her. The countless hours of practice, the private stories she had told through music alone. This was her moment to speak without words. Before she went on stage, she observed the audience. People were chatting softly, some scanning programs, others adjusting their cameras and phones. She noticed the little gestures, a hand brushing hair behind an ear, a child leaning forward with curiosity, an older couple holding hands tightly. All of them carried expectations, excitement, or maybe skepticism. She understood the complexity of human attention, the way people could be distracted yet receptive, critical yet moved. She felt a quiet thrill, knowing she had the power to reach them through the music she created. When the host announced her name, she walked to the stage slowly, each step measured. She carried herself simply, as always, but there was a quiet determination in her posture. The applause started softly, tentative at first, and then grew steadily. She acknowledged it with a small nod, feeling her heart race but not falter. Sitting at the piano, she rested her hands lightly on the keys. Closing her eyes for a moment to center herself, she began with a soft chord, letting the sound flow gently into the room. At first, it was delicate, almost fragile, a whisper to test the waters. But gradually, the melody grew stronger, weaving through the air with a confidence she had not fully felt until now. Each note carried intention, each pause held meaning. The audience fell silent, absorbed by the way the music spoke directly to them. Conversation stopped. The subtle rustle of movement ceased. All attention focused on her and the piano. As if the world outside had melted away, she allowed herself to feel every emotion she had ever kept hidden. Joy, sorrow, longing, hope, they all found a place in her fingers. She did not play to impress, nor to perform perfectly. She played to express, to connect, to let the music carry her story to strangers who had never known it. As the melody unfolded, she felt a new kind of freedom, the liberation of being truly seen. Not for appearances, but for the essence of who she was. The audience reacted in ways she could not have imagined. A woman near the front leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly, eyes glistening. A young man nodded slowly, swaying to the rhythm, lost in the sound. Even the children were quiet, drawn in by the subtle shifts of tempo and emotion. People who had come expecting simple entertainment were now witnesses to something far deeper. They could feel the care, the life, the countless hours she had poured into her music. Every note spoke of patience, resilience, and hidden beauty as she continued. She experimented subtly with the melody, weaving in small improvisations that reflected her personal touch. The audience noticed, their attention sharpening, drawn into the unexpected twists and turns. She realized that music, like life, could surprise people, could move them in ways they did not anticipate. And just like that, she felt a quiet thrill. The ordinary perception of her had disappeared. She was no longer invisible. She was a force in the room, shaping the atmosphere, guiding emotions, and making the audience feel something real. Her hands moved with both precision and instinct, a perfect combination of technical skill and emotional depth. Each chord resonated. Each sequence carried weight. The room seemed to pulse with the sound, the energy of her playing filling every corner, reaching every person present. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward, held their breath, or whispered softly to companions about the beauty of the moment. She could feel their engagement, a living connection forming between her and everyone listening. Halfway through the piece, she introduced a quieter section, a reflective melody that drew the audience in even closer. The soft, lingering notes created a sense of intimacy, despite the size of the room. She could sense the emotions shifting, hearts opening and minds quieting. People were no longer observers. They were participants, carried along by the music's narrative. She realized that her ordinary exterior had never mattered. Her music was the bridge between who she was and the impact she could have on the world. As she played the climactic section, the music swelled dramatically. It was a moment of release, a wave of sound and emotion that built upon everything that had come before. The audience responded with audible gasps, leaning into the rhythm, captivated by the intensity of the performance. She felt her body move with the music, each gesture purposeful, each movement enhancing the expression. In that moment, she understood the full power of her gift. It was not just about talent, it was about presence, intention, and the courage to share something deeply personal with strangers. The final notes lingered, soft and resonant, filling the room with a delicate silence. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the echo of the music and the shared energy of the audience. Then, slowly applause began, tentative at first, then growing louder, more heartfelt. People rose from their seats, clapping and cheering, moved not only by the music, but by the authenticity of her expression. She felt a rush of gratitude, a profound sense of connection that she had never experienced before. For the first time, she realized that being extraordinary did not require loudness, flamboyance, or seeking attention. It required honesty, courage, the willingness to let the world see what had been hidden. After the performance, people came forward to speak with her. Some were emotional, others curious, and many simply wanted to express gratitude for the experience she had shared. They told her how the music had touched them, how it had evoked feelings they had long ignored, and how it had made them see life differently for a few precious minutes. She answered softly, humbly acknowledging their words, but feeling inwardly transformed. The validation was not about fame, was about connection. Her music had reached hearts, and that realization was more powerful than any applause. She left the stage and walked through the crowd, observing the lingering reactions. People whispered, smiled at each other, and exchanged looks of wonder. She noticed the subtle ways in which her music had altered the atmosphere, the quiet ripple effect of genuine artistry. It struck her that talent alone was not enough. It was the act of sharing it, of stepping forward despite fear, that truly made the difference. She had done that, and in doing so, she had opened a door not just for herself, but for the people who had listened. When she returned home that evening, the apartment felt different. The piano in the corner no longer seemed like a quiet, waiting friend. It felt like a companion that had grown with her, celebrating the courage she had shown. She touched the keys softly, replaying fragments of the performance, savoring the emotions that had flowed through her fingers and into the audience. She understood now that the ordinary life she had lived was only one part of her identity. The other part, hidden, rich, and powerful, had emerged. It had changed everything. She spent the night reflecting on the experience. She thought about the people she had moved, the hearts she had touched, and the courage it had taken to step forward. She realized that her life, once confined to quiet routines and private music, could expand in ways she had never imagined. The ordinary world outside her apartment was still there, bustling and indifferent, but inside her, a new world had opened, one filled with possibilities, connections, and the knowledge that her talent could matter in ways beyond herself. The following days brought unexpected attention. People from the event reached out, offering invitations, opportunities, and encouragement. Some wanted her to perform again, others simply wanted to talk about the music they had experienced. She felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension, recognizing that her life was changing, but also understanding that the core of who she was, the quiet observer, the careful listener, the dedicated musician, remained intact. She would navigate this new world on her own terms, carrying both her ordinary and extraordinary selves in harmony and in the quiet moments. She returned to her apartment piano, letting the sound flow freely. No longer constrained by fear or invisibility, she played with joy, with reflection, with a sense of purpose. Each note was a reminder that she had found her voice, her place in the world, and the courage to share it. The ordinary exterior had faded in the eyes of those who had listened, replaced by recognition of the depth, beauty, and power she had always carried quietly within herself. The experience had taught her something profound, that true talent does not announce itself, that ordinary appearances can hide extraordinary gifts, and that courage is not the absence of fear but the willingness to step forward despite it. She had faced the eyes of strangers, shared her music, and discovered the impact it could have. And in doing so, she had discovered something even more valuable, the truth of her own power, her own voice, and her own capacity to connect with the world in ways she had never imagined.